for the one or two of you that weren't here last week, the National Science Foundation held a Open Knowledge Network workshop a couple of weeks ago, 3 days. We had been asked to submit some use cases into that ontology-oriented workshop. We did. We submitted one on a decarceration user story involving our beloved Sarah Thompson persona. We also submitted one on a family reunification user story, also associated with Sarah Thompson. And through the good graces of Paul Wormley, who is managing our submissions, we submitted a proposal for a NEEM ontology being led by Tom Carlson, and there was an IGES proposal that was submitted that I think ended up not going anywhere, but I'm not positive. Paul, are you on today?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Which
No.
Paul were you talking
about? Paul Wormley.
Yeah, I don't see Paul.
No, in any case, it doesn't much matter. We ended up, through the process of the workshop, we ended up merging the decarceration and reunification use case into a single decarceration reunification use case. And we separated out a consent use case from the decarceration variant. We now are working over the next 4 months on refining those use cases so that they can be considered by the National Science Foundation for investment, I think. Bottom line is, today we had the kickoff meeting for the consent, the Open Knowledge Network consent use case group. I got a number of folks that volunteered from Unify to join us in moving that forward. Thank you all. And we'll have more meetings as we better understand what it is NSF wants us to do. Tomorrow at 10:30 in the morning, there's going to be a NEEM ontology working group kicked off. If you are interested in that, pop me email at bd@handspicker.net, and I'll put you together with Tom Carlson, who's leading that effort. And on Friday at 10 a.m., I'm leading the decarceration reunification kickoff meeting. So if you're interested in participating in that, pop me an email. And that was all I wanted to put out there.
Great. That sounds pretty cool. I know I did talk to Paul, and it sounds like your persistence and the group's persistence is well received, because it's all, volunteer for a year and then we'll figure out what we're going to fund, right? So
not quite a year, but volunteer for 4 months and then we'll figure out.
Then wait a year, right? Until they figure out how to procure it.
Particularly for our two efforts, the consent and the decarceration reunification, we are so far ahead. Just in our original write-ups, we're so far ahead of where anybody else is at this workshop that this is not going to be a heavy lift. The major issue I have is just making sure that we play nice in the sandbox. We don't just bully something through.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually put Mark on the spot for a second. We were just in a conversation with DC Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, who's been Mark's new boss, who took over there. We're talking about interoperability and obviously the juvenile issues there. Same conversation we're having in Arizona now, actually. But Mark, do you want to just say a few words about it? Because this sounds like a really interesting connection point here with what we were just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with DC, I don't know if folks know what's going on in the area right now, but we have a real gun violence problem. I know that sounds like something that's been going on for years and years, but there's been a real uptick in the district, not just with gun violence, but with juveniles, in the district. And we don't know if it's an artifact of, kids out of the physical schools and, during COVID. And obviously things are, going back to normal, but those numbers haven't gone down. So our mayor has instituted initiatives around reducing gun violence and doing analysis on a lot of the data that my agency collects. So giving a little background to CJCC, the team that I lead here works with a number of different agencies in the criminal justice system, our local law enforcement, MPD, to courts, to our Attorney General, and then also federal agencies. We work with the U.S. Attorney's Office as part of the DOJ, to FBI, and really we're trying to create interoperability between a lot of the criminal justice agencies here in the district. Now we're also trying to expand that and have relationships with Maryland, Pennsylvania, Delaware, to expand a lot of the data sharing, again, to a lesser degree, as compared to within the district and with federal agencies. But now back to what we're talking about with juvenile data, there's, we want to, because of the sensitivity of juvenile data, we really can't apply a lot of the agreements that we have so far with some of our agencies. We do have agreements in place for juvenile data for, again, a smaller set of agencies, but we're still trying to figure that out. And we're looking at, other jurisdictions out there that are doing the same thing or attempting to do the same thing. And we have our own experience to share, because we do actually share a lot of juvenile data between our agencies, and just trying to get those kids the right services, and maybe identify some patterns before larger crimes are committed, or before crimes are even committed, to get them the services that they need and their families need before anything happens. So that's really the position we're in right now.
Thanks. There's been, the challenges of data interoperability, within the justice world, obviously the NEAM world of that, right? So is one of the intersections that our board of directors, the stewards, has sort of led the flag with Paul and Wormley, who's been a leader in that area for a long time, and then Tony Capizzi, who's a judge in Ohio, does a lot of criminal court and drug courts. Actually, Mark, that was one question I was going to ask you around. I imagine, opioids are a gigantic issue in DC. Is there an overlap? I mean, what's the overlap with the violence? Is it correlated? Is it happening there? Is it, you're seeing an increase in that as well? Because this opioid title, that was the crisis we were living under 2 years ago, right? That was the national crisis. That was it. And now it's back. right?
Well, definitely in the surrounding states. I mean, DC isn't immune to that in any way, but I definitely in the surrounding states. And a lot of the crimes committed in the nation's capital are actually, people. I'm saying crossing the borders. It's like really just blocks away. Maryland, Virginia. It's a metro ride, a stop or two in some cases away from being within in DC. But we have, I mean, the need for sharing, that type of data is huge because it's not necessarily DC citizens that are, in the justice system, and vice versa. I mean, it just there's a lot of your address, your zip code doesn't really predict where you may be arrested or charged.
Mark, just FYI, I popped into the chat the
Yeah.
decarceration user story. It includes a pretty picture, nice graphic in it, as well as a bunch of other artifacts that might be of interest.
Thank you for that.
That's great. Thanks. And as I said earlier, we just started up our ITCC training program with Arizona, and a group of folks from the AG's office who are trying to do diversion. So with juveniles as well, and decarceration. So there's all of a sudden a lot of action, and it has the same issue, the same thing as with aging. It's all same kinds of issues of connecting the dots for at-risk populations across different sectors and things. So it should be interesting. I'm sure there's none of that in California, so no problem there. So I think unless anyone else has any updates, I'll share.
I can do a little segue to that. We're doing some work with in Marin County with probation.
Oh, cool.
Who with the focus on youth. It was just a partner of ours that I would never have anticipated. But their interest in prevention and behavioral health and being able to make sure that we get the services to the kids when they need it. They've been a really great partner.
And Marin's been at that for a while, right?
Yeah, we've actually had I think one of the first in the country, maybe first in, I know at least first in the state, a safe prescribing initiative that was community-based. But what I love, I actually co-chaired it with our public health officer. And what I was really drawn to it is because the public health was so, definitely a partnership with the community of being able to help with policies and procedures and initiatives to be able to drive safe prescribing in the community. And then we added a youth lens to that. One of the projects we're doing is a pilot right now with Unite Us that's being supported by Kaiser, but putting a youth lens with probation. So I'm happy to talk to you about it further.
Sure. Well, maybe it'll come up in the conversation. So I'm going to turn over the controls, as you co-host, to talk about what's going on there.
Do you want to do will you do the that one video that we were queuing up?
Sure. Why don't you want to just do a quick introduction while I get that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Timmy Leslie, and I'm with Blue Path Health. We're a consulting firm here in the Bay Area in California, just north of San Francisco. I've been working my entire career in the space of HIE and EHR adoption, and really helping all the stakeholders, whether it's adoption at the clinical site or health plans, government agencies, helping to make a clear runway for the adoption. That's where we really spend our time. And I thought I was through with that segment of my career of health information exchange. And then last year, our governor signaled that he was very interested in seeing that we had statewide HIE or data sharing. And then there were two bills that were introduced. And with that, a group of stakeholders decided to stand up Connecting for Better Health that I lead. And I mean, I Daniel's been coming to some of our meetings, and he asked me to present today of what that initiative is, give you a little bit of background on the mandate that was passed as a result of that legislation, and what we're doing to be able to come up with some common definitions and hopefully a common data sharing agreement.
Okay, so I think I got this here. Let me see if this is.
And I'm just super proud of this, and asked Daniel if it might be something that you would want to see. But when we started up the initiative last year, we really focused on patient stories. And this is one that is pretty great. So it's a good reminder of why we're here. If we can
Just to check, you guys see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna just play it. If there's a few, I enabled the sound, so it should come through your own computers. If it doesn't, somebody holler and try it again. So, well, it's just a minute and a half. Okay, great. Here we go.
I am a family and community medicine physician. I am the medical director at Sacramento Native American Health Center, and I provide primary care services from pediatrics to geriatrics. When you are presented with a patient that clearly is in need of help, but you're having to wait for records to determine the next step, it doesn't necessarily hurt me individually, but the patient is potentially hurt significantly as they wait. I had a patient who I saw last year who said, yeah, I was in the hospital and they said I had a stroke. In my mind, there's certain things that I think that the patient is going to need after having a stroke. What medications do they need? Are there specialists that they need to be following up with? I requested the records 3 or 4 different times and did not get them. And waiting for those things, that was 3 or 4 months that the patient wasn't able to get those services. I still followed the patient and he still has limitations that I'm not convinced he would have had otherwise. The number of times in which we get the same labs over and over again, simply because we don't have access to the labs previously, or there's not an easy health information exchange to import those labs into our system, is ridiculous. Simply trying to get the records from outside entity or get a referral through is a painstakingly slow process, and in the meantime, the patient is the one that's suffering.
Well done.
Thank you. Do you know how hard it is to get those stories? We probably spent a good 12 months.
It shouldn't be, because we can all tell those stories. I mean, that just does like every day of my life as a practicing clinician, because I've never practiced with a functioning HIE. The VA Vista system's the best thing I was ever part of.
Well, I will follow up with you. And we probably spent a good 6 months before we even stood up Connecting for Better Health on another project where we were looking at patient and provider stories, and finally got to a point where we could get some produced. So our website has, and I think Kira is going to put a link to our website that I'll be telling you about, but there's more there and you're welcome to them. And we're hopefully going to go out with another campaign this year to be able to collect more patient and provider stories. I don't think we can be loud enough. So I think with that, Daniel, if you want to bring up my deck, or do you want me to do it?
I can do it here.
Okay. Just keep me honest here.
Oh, we've got time.
Okay. So Connecting for Better Health, it's a group of stakeholders. If you want to just go to the next slide, I'm really committed to advancing data sharing across the state. Oh, there it is. Now it started. We were trying to figure that out.
It was so good the first time. Well, let's watch it again.
Hopefully you can go to the next slide. When we stood up the coalition, we worked on a charter together, and this is really pulls out some of those key elements of the charter. We have a vision, purpose, and principles that, again, I'm happy to walk through those with you, but we worked on this together. And then we have policy goals, and these policy goals are revised every year. These happen to be last year's goals, but I thought it would be really good for you to see our background, where we came together to be able to, we use the word compel, but actually we're able to pass a mandate that was part of the trailer bill that I'm going to go through with you, which was the need to be able to require data sharing across the state among stakeholders. We also really are focused on pulling down federal funds, which our state of all states has not done a very good job. If you've been following California, I used to work in New York, where I know that the matching funds have been well taken care, well advanced, and we are California has done very poorly there. So we are looking at being able to continue to work with the state to be able to draw down federal funds as well as general funds. And then finally, there's been a lot of politics, I would say, as well as point of view in the state around what constitutes an HIE. We went down 10 years ago, we went down the path of standing up one HIE. And now what we have is a patchwork of health information exchange across the state. Some communities have local exchanges. Some communities have multiple exchanges that they work with. Some are community exchanges. So we really want the state to recognize that providers should use or think about HIE as the intermediary, have qualified HIEs across the state, but guarantee that there's no white space, and use, not rip and replace, but use what we have. So that's what we stand for. If you go to the next slide, and I think there's a little, I can't see everything on this. Can everyone see that, or is it me?
Yeah.
I think, Daniel, there might be something on your screen.
Yeah, so does everyone else have like a square at the bottom right? Ah,
There we go.
yeah. And there's another one down below it, like that's blocking stuff too.
We try it again.
So our stakeholders are from all across the board, and we want the tent to be as big as possible. And I think even just starting with that patient story shows you that we want to make it consumer friendly, and be able to always be centered with the patient and the consumer as we go through this work. So we have some very familiar organizations that you probably all work with that stood up the group. But we have lots more that come on a regular basis, and we'll go out this year when we do different advocacy kind of letters and other types of statements that we'll go out and grab folks' signatures and logos when we need it. But this is what we call our sponsors or supporters, I'm sorry. And we are not collecting funds right now. We get mostly in-kind work, as well as we have a grant from Blue Shield of California that helped us to stand this up. So we have several health plans, notably we have SEIU, which is our union, one of the largest unions here in the state, and then also other technology innovators and HIEs and consumer groups that have come together.
Timmy, quick question for you. I know that Kaiser is such a huge player there in California. How do you view them as their own? Are they in the tent or outside of the tent when it comes to this kind of work?
So far, they've been pretty outside of the tent.
Yeah.
I think we've got some work to do there, but in some of their communities, they do rely on community partners, especially in behavioral health. So I don't know how we can be really successful without exchanging data with Kaiser. I think they do go through the national networks, but it's whether or not they're required to respond to those pings is what I think we're going to really have to figure out how everybody needs to play in the sandbox this year. We also have if you are up on our website as well, we produce fact sheets. So we're constantly looking at how do we put together 1-pagers, 2-pagers. Some of it's pretty wonky. Others we're trying to kind of pull it up to be more of an infographic. That's our aim this year. But I think it's been really helpful to be able to have a place for organizations and those that are interested in learning more about HIE to come together and be able to have a dialogue. We really haven't had that place or space in the state for several years. Let's go to the next slide, please. One of our, I think, grounding fact sheets that we have, we pulled from when the state went forward with saying how many different use cases that they want to satisfy with HIE. We kind of, and I think this is to your point earlier around with some of the organizations saying we may not need statewide HIE. This is where we're really making the case. And there's a big debate too around national networks, TEFCA. We have a statewide or a state-based data sharing policies and procedures that's also voluntary. So we have a lot of different resources that we really have to kind of sort out as we go through this process. But this also just points to where our perspective from the coalition point of view is that we really do need to have a real-time, competent data sharing capability across all the regions in the state to satisfy multiple use cases that are of very great importance to the state. I think we've got the little black screen on there again, Daniel.
Yeah, hold on, I got it.
That's okay.
Say the Russians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I've got the next slide. Let me, if I can see if I can pull that up.
Yeah, you want to try to run it?
Yeah, let me try it.
I'm going to
Want to give it to me?
go ahead. It's all yours.
Okay. Yeah. So you can see the, see if I can get this to be. Got it, everyone? Does that work? Okay. So this takes you through the priority use cases. Again, we kind of, the state thinks of it as a disaster response prior to the pandemic. We also kind of now pull in the pandemic response. Prior to the pandemic, we had a lot of mobility and mobilization around our fire seasons, and where we saw the need to be able to have access to longitudinal record. We also have, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but the world of our whole person care projects that we've had over the course of a number of years is now really embedded into our Medi-Cal transformation, which is our Medicaid plans. But that's also really requiring multiple different actors and being able to access that patient record. And then of course, under quality and value-based purchasing too. Let's see if I can advance my slide. There we go. So I mentioned earlier that we had the mandate that went in, that was passed, and this was a result of two different pieces of legislation that then really didn't result in the passage through the houses, but instead it was embedded in what's called our trailer bill for the budget. But it requires data sharing, and it has certain deadlines for that data sharing. Being able to have health plans and large hospitals be able to sign on to a single data sharing agreement and start sharing by January of 2024. We also stood up a stakeholder advisory group, which is called the Data Exchange Framework Advisory Group. They meet on a monthly basis. They're required to update the legislature in April and then have recommendations by July of this year. Part of that, they have two subgroups. One is around identity management, and then the other is, and the identity management subgroup is kind of taking the form of multiple focus groups that the state is facilitating. And then the other subgroup is called the data sharing agreement subgroup. And that has designated advisors or subject matter experts that come together more than monthly basis. And all of these are open to the public. And I'm happy to.
Are these all convened by agency or by HHS?
By agency, by the above, so our HHS that sits above Medi-Cal and our social services and our public health.
So is that out of John's office as well? John
Ohanian is, he is leading it, and that's a new office. But all of the HIE is going to roll up under him.
Yeah, so just for reference or context perspective, John was instrumental in San Diego 2-on-1 and the work that was happening there years and years and years ago. And then came back to this position right under Mike Wilkening to kind of stand this up, which is great. So we've been in conversations around sort of coming at it from the other direction around the consent work. So that's part of the connecting point here, is that there's a number of conversations happening at different places. And it's great that there's a person who's got responsibility for this, because that was not always there, right?
Oh, you have no idea.
Oh, I do.
I mean, I think if being a stakeholder here myself in California, you know, what I'm always looking for, and you can see it here too, is that they are also engaging the state and county agencies. They don't require the county, and we got to do a lot of work there, especially when you're talking about consent, because we have the 54 different counties that have all different consent rules. But that is what I'm looking for here, is how do we have leadership from the state that includes and compels our state agencies and departments to be part of this data sharing. I see a hand.
Yeah, this is Bill Kowalski. I just have a quick question on that number one, that first bullet that talks about the entities that have to share information. Does the bill define who they have to share it with? Like, this doesn't say who you have to share it with. It just says, must have health information shared in real time.
They don't define real time either.
So they don't define whom, and they don't define real time.
There's some, I can send, I'll follow up with you, but yes, there's some language that breaks this down, and it asks for the kind of data that is shared. For example, for hospitals, they talk about it's UCDI 1, Virgin 3. So they'll go through and say the different types of data that's shared, but it doesn't give really specific examples of the standard for sharing, nor does it really specify who you're sharing it with. No.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
On Bill's question there, I wonder, is there conversation, or have you heard of conversation around any of the accelerator work with the FAST work groups, or Siren and Gravity and all these other
Gravity,
things?
yeah, Mark Savage came on to our call last week, and that's what we do. So we have calls every other week, or we bring on speakers as well. Mark talked about Gravity. I don't think I've had Siren on, but we would be happy to, bring on folks that you think we should be spreading the word.
Yeah, no, there's one. So a couple weeks ago, just for your information, Stefan Konya from the ONC was on for about 2 hours talking about all sort of the ONC initiatives and stuff. So the intersection there. So that's actually a really good one to maybe to reference to some folks on your side, because it really lays out, there's maybe 4 or 5 major initiatives that are coming up. And actually the context of the conversation was around consent.
Yeah.
And how we want to put together with them, they want us to help put together a springtime sort of workshop on consent.
Great.
National. So that's what a nice intersection and interaction there across, what you guys are doing there, especially if there's not defined entities and defined stuff. There's a lot of stuff I think that's being defined, and folks on this call are part of those technical sort of work groups as well, on a variety of areas. So there's a lot of interconnections on that one as well.
Yeah, when I look at this, especially the data sharing agreement, I think what we really need to do is reconcile and be in tandem with the other, with the standard setting organizations and the policies and procedures. But I think what we need in California is more specificity around requirements, accountability, enforcement, where and how do we have kind of ability to kind of highlight when somebody's being a bad actor. How would we know if they're being a bad actor? Like, I think we've got to really kind of think those issues through.
Hi, this is Matt Bishop from Open City Labs. You might look at the National Directory HL7 Patient Administration Work Group, which is doing work around a FHIR standard around directories. But one thing that's unique about it, although the standard itself is a FHIR, it supports endpoints that could belong to any other standard, right? So you could have a HL7v2 or a CCDA or a direct endpoint or whatever it might be, because the challenge always is of course, with, all these regional partners is getting people to paddle in the same direction and adopt the same standard. And so something that would allow for flexibility. And then the other reason why, some of the work around the National 21st Century Cures Act is that the ONC is thinking about these very same questions with like the patient access API and various other methods of, from a technological perspective, monitoring compliance with these regulations, which seem like they're similar to what you guys have in California. So happy to talk more about that offline, but
I'd love to follow up with you on that.
sure.
And I actually,
Go
go ahead.
Oh, it's Mary Sarah from AWS. We spoke, I think last month.
Yes, we did.
But yes, in California, there is at least precedent for the state agencies sharing data with the counties. Is that being leveraged?
I guess I don't know how to answer that.
Okay, all right. Because I mean, it is being done in several of the counties right now. So I think that should be something to explore. And I think if we think about the HIEs as a mechanism for sharing as opposed to a party to share with, then it kind of changes the conversation. So if it's really the state sharing the data with the county via the HIE, I think that becomes something that looks very similar to what's already being done.
Yeah, I think the issue that we're grappling with is once the data gets to the county's not sharing it with their community partners. And we also have an issue with the state not really embracing. I mean, we've had two use cases that I start pretty much, Daniel, you've seen this on my calls, like two that we're really focused on. One is around getting the vaccination data to the payers, or to the payers, to the providers, because they do not have easy access to whether or not their patient that's coming in the door has been vaccinated or not. And the state has that database. And the second is around CalAIM, which is the Whole Person Care Project. If we were just to focus on those two, I think we could solve a lot and get the data where it needs to be. And I just am looking at my count. I unfortunately have a 2 o'clock hard stop, but I just want to continue real quick.
No more questions, everybody. Hold your questions.
Yeah. So I just want to run through, you have this in your inbox, but here's those that are on the advisory group. So again, it's a really wide group of folks that are setting the stage for us.
Cool.
Here is, from our perspective, we don't want to be siloed on just looking at this one piece of legislation. We also want to, highlight to the state that all these other things that they're involved with, including, getting vaccine data in the hands of providers, requires data sharing. And sometimes we get into these silos that we're trying to break. And a couple of these I just want to highlight for you. One that's been really near and dear to my heart is the PULSE e-registry, of having PULSE data, which is end of life directions, available and accessible to emergency workers, nursing homes, and hospital settings, as well as providers. Also, our Medicaid is standing up a population health management program, which we're scratching our heads with. How is that going to be done? What kind of data is it? What's the latency of that data? How is it going to be used? We have a big behavioral health initiative that's supposed to be engaging with the schools. So a lot that's going on that we're trying to show that there needs to be a modernization of how we share data to accomplish these goals. And so this is what we're working on this year. We are helping to define the mandate. As we talked about earlier, what equals real time? How are organizations supporting each other, and are they required, and who's going to give and take? Also then focus more and more on financial support. We just wrote a letter, and it is in the budget request for this year, $100 million to fund the managed care organizations, as well as health information exchange to be able to provide technical assistance and onboarding to our providers. And then finally, how are we going to hold everybody accountable and make sure that we're under the timelines and we get delivered what we need to deliver? So I guess think of us as the coalition as a bit of a watchdog, and we're happy to take the reins. I think I got through it. So Kira's been putting a few things in the chat, but we would welcome you to join our calls if you have interest in how the state is mobilizing. We'd love for you to join in on the conversation. And I think what we would like to do is be able to take as much stakeholder input as possible and then relay that back to the state. We also have, and so this is the URL to be able to register for our meetings. But we also have a way for you to register for our, we have a weekly newsletter that goes out. That's, we would love any events that you want us to listen into or let our stakeholders know about. Any, key pieces in the press that you want us to get out, we'll do that too. And then activate for letter writing campaigns or other advocacy.
Okay. Just on that last thing, we're actually going to be doing a workshop with All In and Data Across Sectors, which is an RWJF thing, in sometime in early April, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So it's all on consent related kinds of things. So there's a lot of California participants in that. So I'll make sure I get you that.
We would love to, yes. And consent is one of our key, when we look at the state solving for all these different use cases, consent of course needs to be solved. So we can't go anywhere. We understand that you're at do not pass go unless we have consent figured out.
Cool. Well, thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry I have a call here that I have to take, but I really appreciate you inviting me today, and thank you. And I'll definitely come back.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. How do I change this now? Okay, there we are. Everybody's back. So that's what's going on the left coast a little bit, which is pretty cool. A lot of similar things happening. I want to make sure that Kathy is connected because of the work on the HIEs in New York and the Bronx and the proof of concept. I think California's been struggling for a long time trying to get a single voice across the state. It's just, it's too big, really. There's too many different tiny little counties and then LA and Southern California. So
Right. Well, there's just a hard wall between Northern and Southern California. It just, they're like two different places. And then real Northern California is, again, a whole other place. So
yeah. Well, one of the things I've always noticed is just getting them to talk to themselves was a role we played about 10 years ago. Actually, Mary Sarah, if you're on still, right? Just running conferences where the state, like, here's San Diego, look what they're doing, and Santa Barbara and Alameda and Sacramento. They were not even
they're not
aware
learning
of the
from each
innovations that were
other.
going on.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
So
so sad.
Daniel, do you have more detail? She said you've listened to her story a couple of times about the whole person care. Like the immunization thing I get, and
Yeah.
it seems like nobody can do this immunization thing, right? But what was it that she was saying, sort of contradicting Mary Sarah, that there's been movement in a few counties that
Yeah. Well, I think
where they've talked about being stuck in that initiative.
yeah, I'm interested to hear Mary Sarah. Now, there's been a lot of work that's gone on, and Mary Sarah's been in the middle of a lot of it. So there's been progress in that. I think this, and they finished, was it last year, year before, their 1115 waiver, which was a whole person care waiver that I think had, what was it, 6, maybe 8 or 10 counties, maybe 8 counties. I don't know. I don't remember. Do you remember, Mary Sarah, how many were in the waivers?
The waivers, it was all but, I think there were less than 5 that didn't get a waiver. So it was almost every county.
Oh, yeah, mine. Okay. So my understanding is AB 133 is learning from that set of waivers, and now sort of it's the next, it's version 2.0 for every county. And they're trying to, line things up and try to do, as Timmy was saying, a little more standardization and trying to figure out, because HIEs are so important. They've been struggling with that forever and ever, and MPIs, and how do you identify somebody? But so there's a lot of momentum, and the timelines are really fast. And they're putting a bunch of money into it. But I read something that looked at a June 2022 of actually having a strategy on consent that would be useful for or applicable to the whole state. Something of that nature. I can pull it up, but it was like, really, June? You're going to have a standard. So that's part of my motivation to really, sort of advocate for the consent utility, because nobody's got it. I mean, they haven't solved it there. I was talking to Solano today, and like, they're in the midst of trying to sort of address the torrents of state requirements coming down without definition and without clarity about what are you supposed to be doing. Just do something, but make sure you do the right thing. So they're torturing the counties again. So it's a bit of a shit show, I think, in a technical term on that one. They're doing so many things. They're pushing so many initiatives out, and they need a confliction zone, I think, between the state and the counties, because we sat through the ACEs initiative, the ACEs Aware Adverse Child Experiences, that got pushed out from the Surgeon General's office. They had, I think, 3 or 4 competing sort of mega proposals that were not proposals, but programs that were working with different sets of counties to do basic sort of ACEs education across it. And it kept changing. So I think they're very ambitious around doing things. I just don't think they, as she said, ready, aim, fire, and then start to plan. So they got it kind of mixed up a little bit, I think, in terms of what they can actually get done. Because they're 58 different counties, they're different entities, they're all different. They don't play well together, and they don't learn from one another, which is unfortunate. So anyway.
They're also structured. They're structured differently, Daniel. I think that's also important.
Say more about that.
One of the reasons that San Diego was to be as successful as they are, and they are sharing with contractors, with community-based organizations there, as well as in Sonoma. But one of the reasons San Diego was able, from a timing and also a breadth perspective, was that Nick had, he has like a super HHS, and then he pulled in housing as well.
Right.
So having that kind of single director over most of it definitely made it an easier task. Whereas other counties, they're broken up, the agencies are different. So you would have had to work with 4 different agencies, as opposed to just 2.
I think that was one of the themes that came out of that work, was being a quote unquote super agency like San Diego was, allowed them to really work more easily, because you had behavioral health inside, and you had a lot of other aspects inside the agency, as opposed to like Alameda, which is got behavioral health, I think, is still outside of the HHS agency. So it makes it just another very difficult barrier to get through. But also, San Diego's got a lot of resources as well. So they can self-fund stuff that other counties can't really do in a way. So San Diego is never a perfect sort of example. But the other part that I think, and Bill, I would would agree with this, is they've had the great privilege, I guess, I don't know if privilege is the right word, to actually have a leader who's been there for 15 years. Like, you know, Allegheny had that, like Montgomery had that, like Hennepin had that, you know, like other counties did. You've got that enduring leadership. That's what carries the day. And without that,
Well,
it's just hard, right?
And you had the right leadership. You had the leadership with the vision in those. I mean, especially in Minnesota, there's Hennepin County and then there's Minnesota. That's what I mean, it's
So, so I'm excited about trying to sort of ground something there. One other piece of news, be interesting to hear from others if there's stuff going on. We should, and then before we sort of wrap up here, but one of the things, again, is that we have now an official date to present to the Data Funders Collaborative about the consent opportunity that we're putting together with the various 3 or 4 county or proof of concepts, along with AWS and Microsoft and Linux Foundation and ONC and the rest of you all here, that there will have an audience to actually talk about this amongst sort of a whole group of philanthropy and technical philanthropy, which is great, to see if we can actually supercharge this effort and drive national attention to it, and, you know, be able to do this in, you know, 3, 4, 5 places this year, next year, and then expand that out. So having you know, having partnerships in California as well as Colorado, New Jersey, and New York, I think it's a great place to be. So with that, I'm losing my voice, and we're losing people here. So we'll make the recordings available as well. Next week, I'm going to be at HIMSS, and I don't think we actually had a confirmed presenter next week. So we're going to take a break, at least for the next week. We're trying to get HL's, task for HL7 task force. Brian, were you part of that this week? Was there a meeting on HL7 task force, or am I conflating things?
The Human and Social Services Working Group, or which task force are you talking about?
I can't remember exactly. Anyways, it might have been the fire task force. Fire.
We have a lot of fire task force, a lot of fire working groups.
Yeah, Mary, are you familiar with the Fire at Scale task
Oh,
force?
Fire at Scale task force.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, FAST.
Yeah, FAST is going through an evolution. So I think FAST was convened by ONC, and they're doing the handoff to HL7.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, so they're,
Yeah.
That's cool. That's great. Oops. I was going to say, who else is at HIMSS next week? Anybody going to be at the HIMSS conference?
I will be there, and Daniel, I think you and Pooja and I have some time in the interoperability showcase.
Right.
On Wednesday afternoon, I think, is what we had talked about. So anyone who wants to come, we actually have an e-consent vignette with Cerner, AD Vault, Trisotech, HealthFlow, and the Interoperability Institute. The focus of the vignette is consumer empowerment around advanced care directives.
I will be there also, representing OpenCity Labs.
Oh, good.
Great. Where will you be, Matt?
I'm in the innovation showcase. We'll be exhibiting there, but we'll have like one of our demos on continuous run and talking to people, and would love to grab a drink, Daniel, meet in person for the first time.
What a concept. I'm putting you on my dance card. Good to know. Yeah, I'll be there. So overwhelming place.
And if
Sure.
anyone is interested, Friday morning, I'll be manning the VA kiosk for the Business Process Modeling Standards Organization. The VA is providing a lot of support, and I think there's a lot of value in those standards coming to healthcare, particularly if you complement that with the RESTful APIs of FHIR. It's a good initiative.
Barry, did you say the showcase was on Tuesday or Wednesday?
The showcase is all week.
No, the meeting.
Oh.
The
Oh, I had proposed,
I have a Tuesday morning on mine.
nope, Tuesday. Oh, I actually have it Wednesday at 5.
Oh,
So the end of the day
okay.
on Wednesday.
Meeting for cocktails. Not even virtual cocktails. Think of that. Unbelievable.
Amazing.
Yeah. Great. So we'll take a break next week, and then hopefully we'll have a calendar invite going out the following week after that. So be well, everyone. Stay safe. Prayers for the people who are really needing them these days. Okay. And with that, have a great week or 2 or 3.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Take care all.
Bye.